Hello, everyone, and welcome to our annual International Rating webinar. Thank you for joining us today, the 12th of October, 2023. Indeed, I am excited to be your anchor today. Broadcasting live from Lagos, Nigeria's Commercial Nerve Center, we are delighted to welcome you. I am Dr. Wens Mwoga, the Group Head Consulting at DataPro Limited. I am a development economist, chartered accountant, risk manager, compliance professional, and chartered banker. Our annual international rating webinar started in October 2021 by DataPro, Nigeria's numero uno technology-driven credit rating agency. The impulse behind this yearly event is to enhance stakeholder engagement and extend the all-important value proposition of stimulating the Nigerian economy. The 2023 edition is the third uninterrupted annual international webinar. This year's edition will assist in consolidating the traction and benefits gained from previous editions. It will also focus attention on the subnationals in unlocking numerous infrastructural development financing options to stimulate economic growth and development, which will enhance the well-being of Nigerian citizens. This year's program is themed Roles of Subnationals and Credit Rating Agencies in Infrastructure Development. In view of fiscal challenges and inadequate government budgetary allocations for infrastructural development, there is their need for alternative funding arrangement. There are, however, numerous options that can be unlocked by the subnationals in the capital market through consultation, cooperation, collaboration with credit rating agencies, and a great dose of synergy amongst stakeholders at all levels. Today's live international rating webinar is fully packed with local, regional, global, industry, and subject matter experts and professionals. And we are confident it will be value-adding, as it will provide and situate useful insights for stakeholders, especially in the quest to bridge the infrastructural gaps and complement existing and future efforts. It is very instructive to note that when infrastructural financing options and opportunities are leveraged, it will lead to bumper economic activities, which will create numerous job opportunities, reduce insecurity, enhance economic growth, development, and improve the standard of living of Nigerians. This year's guest and panelists lineup parades a rich array of professionals, thought leaders, and a simple yet loaded program of events. We will endeavor to adhere to the planned program within the scheduled time frame. We enjoin you to participate by making generous use of the chat, question and answer box for your questions and comments. We look forward to receiving, collating, and addressing them later. We are optimistic that you will enjoy this program, and it promises to be exciting. Once again, we are quite delighted to be with you today and do warmly welcome you. And now, we take the national anthem. Without further ado, let's get started. We proceed to connect to the source of life and living, our Maker. To take us through this hallowed process, I invite Pastor Olufemi Obaweya, Pastor Redeemed Christian Church of God Promised Land. He is a finance professional, the project director and coordinator, One Alpha K9 Services Limited. Pastor Obaweya, please.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Shall we bow our heads wherever we are to pray? Father, we want to thank you for the third edition of this platform. Thank you for the inspiration. Thank you, Lord, for the facilitators. Thank you for DataPro. Father, thank you for everyone who is joining on this webinar. We acknowledge your grace, we acknowledge your favor and your essence in our various vocations and our various endeavors. Please accept our thanks, we pray, in the name of Jesus. And so we commit this conference webinar into your hands. Guide us as we deliberate. And at the end of this meeting, let it be said that the value has been added corporately and individually to move our various nations and establishments forward. These and more we pray in the precious name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pastor Obaweya, for that opening prayer. The history of compliance and credit rating in Nigeria and Africa would be incomplete without his name in bold print. He has been dubbed the Grandmaster of Compliance in Nigeria and Africa. Under his guidance, DataPro Limited has become a leading provider of compliance solutions and credit rating services. Abimbola Adesheyoju, a fellow of the Compliance Institute of Nigeria, FCN, and a certified compliance professional, is a visionary leader, sought-after commentator, speaker, and author on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction compliance. His expertise is widely respected throughout the field of compliance across Nigeria and Africa, and indeed the world. 28 years ago, he founded DataPro Limited, Nigeria's first and leading compliance consulting and credit rating company. DataPro leveraged its experience in Know Your Customer KYC processes and procedures to develop quality standard training and consulting for banks in Nigeria by rolling out its anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism MSCFT compliance training services in 2005. Initially, DataPro provided third-party services that enabled financial institutions globally conduct required Know Your Customer KYC and enhanced due diligence EDD procedures on individuals and corporate customers located in Nigeria throughout its affiliation with Dun and Bradstreet, D&B. In 2002, when Nigeria was blacklisted by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, and included in the NCCT, the non-cooperative countries and territories list, the need became necessary to engage the international financial institutions on provision of relevant and domesticated anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terrorism MSCFT solutions. DataPro is regarded today as one of the leading and most experienced technology-driven CRO, credit rating agency, compliance, corporate governance, and fraud risk management consulting firms in Nigeria. DataPro is a trailblazer in many areas and contributor to a lot of sectors. Our products and services include credit rating agency CRA, compliance consulting and training, data protection compliance consulting, business information consultation, recovery services and forensic accounting, Know Your Employee KYE verification services, third-party verification, politically exposed persons, Corporate Affairs Commission, and bank verification number, BVN, etc. Today, it not only provides training and consulting services for nearly all the banks in Nigeria and 5 other West African countries, Abimbola Adesoju leads DataPro in its selfless drive and patriotic resolve in the fight against money laundering and terrorist financing in the country. Through his active participation in the industry, he, alongside other stakeholders, started the Compliance Institute Nigeria. The member, Board of Directors of Compliance Institute Nigeria, CIN, Adesoju is championing easy access to global best practice, knowledge sharing, and information exchange amongst compliance practitioners in Nigeria. Abimbola has demonstrated uncommon passion, zeal, enthusiasm, and commitment to the propagation of the ideals of ML CFT CPF compliance in Nigeria and beyond. Without further ado, I introduce to you a true pioneer who is constantly innovating and developing new ways to help organizations stay ahead of the curve. Mr. Abimbola Adesoju, founder, DataPro Limited. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Adesoju.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wentz, and apologies for that technical glitch. Let me first extend my gratitude to all those that have joined from all over the world for this third edition of our International Credit Rating webinar. Some are actually attending for the third time in a row, and have made the webinar part of their annual calendar of events. Let me reiterate that we hold the webinar annually on the second Thursday of every October every year. So it is safe to mark your calendar for subsequent edition. Sustainability, continuity, and succession are part of what has kept DataPro going for 28 years. So we promise you this an objective annually. I want to support, appreciate information, particularly the maybe represent today for the since we started this annual event. The goal of the event, this webinar, especially for those that are joining us for the first time, is quite simple. Our goal is to provide a veritable platform for all stakeholders within the capital markets and others in affiliated sectors of the economy to annually brainstorm on how the African continent as a whole, and by extension, the sub-region in West Africa and Nigeria in particular, can utilize the value proposition of the credit rating industry as an enabler of economic development and prosperity. Even though locally and continentally, we still have a long way to go for those of us from this part of the world to begin to benefit from the veritable financing options that credit rating provide for entities, subnationals, and sovereigns when it comes to infrastructural development. We believe that with consistency, we will get there. The issue of infrastructure development is closely tied to the quality of life. And the truth is that the faster we can accelerate infrastructure development, in our continent and in the individual countries, the quicker we can lift our people out of poverty, the quicker we can even stop the brain drain that is particularly disturbing from our continent. We have therefore carefully selected the theme for this 2023 edition of our webinar to focus on the role of subnationals and credit ratings agencies in infrastructure development. It is our belief as a company that there is still a lot to do when it comes to infrastructure development in Africa and in individual countries. Questions that need to be addressed include: what other financial options do we need to fast-track infrastructural development in our sub-region and in our countries? What exactly is the best developmental partnership structure that will take us to the promised land? How do we improve the quality and sustainability of our infrastructural projects? How do we safeguard the return on investments for those that have invested in infrastructure projects? These and many more of these proposals will be addressed by a carefully selected panel of experts that Dr. Wens will unveil shortly. Before I close, we are also very grateful to the African Development Bank for their support in terms of panel discussants. We are equally appreciative to all our panel discussants, and notably our keynote speaker, the Managing Director of NMRC, Mr. Kehinde Ogundimu. We are privileged that we'll be delivering the keynote address. I therefore enjoin everybody to sit back, listen carefully as I officially declare this webinar open. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the welcome address, Mr. Abimbola Adeseyoju, founder, DataPro Limited, Nigeria's numero uno technology-driven credit rating agency of repute. Your footprints across many walks of life are evident in your doggedness, resilience, contributions to humanity, and numerous achievements as a trailblazer. We thank you, the team, and DataPro and your partners in organizing this annual international webinar, the third in a row, for its value proposition to stakeholders. Obviously, we understand it is not a mean feat to consistently and successfully organize a yearly international webinar of this magnitude. But we are indeed happy that you have promised us that it's going to be an annual event as a service to humanity. We look forward to subsequent editions. Once again, we thank you, Mr. Abimbola Adeseyoju, founder, DataPro, for delivering the fantastic welcome address that touched on the germane and kernel matters that is always synonymous with you. Okay, so we proceed with the program. The Nigerian Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, is an independent agency of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, set up with the primary purpose of enforcing the law against market manipulation, protect investors, maintain fair, orderly, and efficient markets, and facilitate capital formation. One man, saddled with the Herculean task of these all-important four-pronged mission and doing a good job at it, is Dr. Lamido Yuguda, Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. He is an economist, banker, and investment manager with over 30 years' experience in financial services. Dr. Yuguda began his career with Central Bank of Nigeria in 1984 as a senior supervisor of the Foreign Operations Department, which manages Nigeria's external debt records. In 1985, he was redeployed to the Banking Supervision Department to work on prudential regulations and bank licensing, and moved again in 1988 to the Debt Conversion Committee Secretariat to join the pioneer staff tasked with managing the Nigerian Debt Conversion Program. In 1982, he moved back to the Foreign Operations Department and soon after became the senior manager of the Investment Office. Following a secondment, Dr. Yuguda joined the staff of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, in Washington, D.C., USA, in 1997 as an economist in the African department, where he worked on the assessment of economic policies and management of balance of payment support programs in IMF member countries. In 2001, he returned to the Central Bank of Nigeria, where he was assigned the task of leading a staff team charged with restructuring and diversifying the CBN's growing foreign exchange reserve portfolio. By 2010, he became director of the Reserve Management Department. He is credited with the strong risk-aware investment culture in the department and also instilled a disciplined approach to investment evaluation. He is a fellow of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, ICANN, a CFA charter holder. He holds a certificate in financial asset management and engineering from the Swiss Finance Institute, Geneva, Switzerland. Representing Dr. Lamido Yuguda, Director General, Security and Exchange Commission, to deliver the goodwill message, I welcome the Director, Registration, Exchanges and Innovation Department, Mr. Abdul Kadir Abbas. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Doctor. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. I'm here to represent the DG, and I bring warm regards from the DG. Unfortunately, there's another program that he had to attend, but he sent his apologies. So my task is to actually deliver the goodwill message from the DG, Lamido Yuguda, CFA, FTA, FCIB, DG SEC. So whatever I said is the DG speaking. So I will start as those. Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Please permit me to stand by the already established protocol. It is an honor to once again be invited by DataPro to present a goodwill message of this year's international rating webinar themed Role of Subnational and Credit Rating Agencies in Infrastructural Development. I must commend DataPro for its commitment in organizing another webinar aimed at developing the Nigerian debt capital market. This forum, without doubt, provides a platform for timely exchange of ideas and knowledge capable of leading to the development of a roadmap for sustainable infrastructure financing at the subnational levels. Infrastructure development is essential to economic growth and social progress of any nation. It provides the foundation for businesses to operate and for people to access essential services such as education, healthcare, water, and transportation. Subnational government have critical roles in infrastructure development to provide such essential services to their citizens. Indeed, this could be said to be one of the basic responsibilities of a subnational government. Credit rating agencies play an important role in infrastructure development by providing an independent assessment of the creditworthiness of subnational governments and other borrowers. This information is utilized by investors to make informed investment decisions on optimal capital allocation. At the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, we have introduced several initiatives on repositioning the Nigerian capital market to better support infrastructure development. This includes articulation of responsive and facilitative regulation to support innovation and access to capital for subnationals and other entities, promotion of good corporate governance practices, and improved regulation practice and transparent disclosure regime. In addition, the SEC has put in place a number of mechanisms to oversee the activities of all capital market operators and other regulated entities, including credit rating agencies, through a mechanism such as registration, adherence to code of conduct, and general oversight. In the past few years, there was some concern on the role of rating agencies in the global financial system. For example, rating agencies were challenged with respect to their roles in 2008 financial crisis. Some critics have argued that rating agencies were too lenient in their rating of subprime mortgage-backed securities, which contributed to the crisis. The Commission is not unaware of this concern and is committed of ensuring that registered rating agencies operate in a fair and transparent manner. We have taken a number of steps to protect investors and promote confidence in the debt capital market by strengthening our oversight function of rating agencies through issuance of new regulation and amending existing one to actually improve the quality and transparency of the entire ratings. Other notable reforms in the debt capital market introduced by the SEC include developing rules on book building, share registration, rules on green and social bond and sustainability bonds as well, checklist template to guide market operators for fixed income transaction, and the reviewing cost of registration of securities for fixed income, and collaboration with other stakeholders such as the Association of Issuing Houses of Nigeria to streamline the issuance processes. These initiatives have enhanced the average issuance period and improved price discovery process for debt issues. As a result, the value and volume of debt issuances by subnational and corporates have tremendously increased over the years. For instance, the value of state bonds issued and registered by the SEC from 1978 to 2002 rose from 2 billion to 1.13 trillion, respectively. Meanwhile, the 10-year master plan, which was launched in 2015, and then was subsequently revised in November 2022, has outlined a number of initiatives aimed at deepening further the debt capital market through innovation that could unlock private capital for various infrastructure projects, which subnational can also leverage. I believe the synergy between the subnationals and credit rating agencies will potentially play a major role in promoting sustainable infrastructure development, create favorable investment climate, and advance the country's quest for rapid transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm confident that the discussion that takes place today at this event will lead to new ideas on how to accelerate infrastructure development in our country, especially at the subnational levels. It is my expectation that this impressive lineup of panelists, seasoned operators, and other discussants assembled here will do justice to different issues of discourse at this webinar. Once again, I congratulate the board, management, and staff of DataPro credit rating agency for the professionalism that they have so far exhibited in the market and their ethical conduct. And I wish you a very fruitful deliberation. I thank you for listening. Thank you, Lamid Iguda, DG SEC. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdulkadir Abbas, the Director, Registration, Exchanges and Innovation Department of the Securities and Exchange Commission, representing the Director General, Securities and Exchange Commission, Dr. Lamido Yuguda. We are indeed grateful for the good work you and your organization, SEC, are doing in the light of improving and strengthening capital markets. It is our firm belief that you will continue to support us and the industry as well as related stakeholders in this advocacy and various efforts geared towards creating easy and accessible long-term funds through the capital market. Once again, thank you so much for coming and for that wonderful speech.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now we move on to the next item. Kehinde Ogundumi. Ogundumi is an award-winning professional with over 30 years of corporate work experience, spanning financial advisory services, oil and gas, and diversified banking in Africa and America. He has held senior leadership positions, all at various blue-chip companies, including PricewaterhouseCoopers, Chevron, Pepco Energy Services, Freddie Mac, Fannie Mae, and Capital One Bank in the United States of America. Kehinde joined Nigerian Mortgage Refinance Company in 2015 as the Pioneer Executive Director and Chief Financial Officer, and was appointed as the CEO in 2018. He is passionate about the economic empowerment of citizens to advance development around the world. Involved in real estate finance and advocacy, Kehinde is the chairman of the board of directors of the African Union for Housing Finance, AUHF, a not-for-profit organization based in South Africa. Kehinde holds a Bachelor of Science, BSc Honors degree in Electrical Engineering from University of Ibadan and obtained a Master of Business Administration MBA from University of Lagos, Nigeria. He is a fellow of the Institute of the Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, FCA, a member of the American Institute of the Certified Public Accountants, CPA, a Chartered Financial Analyst, CFA, charter holder, a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, FTI, and member, Institute of Directors of Nigeria, MIOD. Kehinde has attended several executive management programs in leading educational institutions, including Harvard Business School, University of Cambridge, University of Cape Town, Stellenbosch University, and University of Pretoria, South Africa. To deliver today's keynote address, joining from Nigeria's national capital, Abuja, I welcome Mr. Kehinde Ogundumi, MD, CEO, NMRC PLC. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. And let me say good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from, because I'm sure people are joining us from across the globe. Let me say a very big congratulations to DataPro on this year's international webinar. Thank you for inviting me to deliver the keynote address at this event. I am a great admirer of the impeccable credibility, professionalism, and forthrightness of DataPro. And I dare say to all participants, if you need to get your hands on any vital information about any entity in Nigeria, I recommend that you contact DataPro. My hearty congratulations to the founder, Mr. Bimbola Adesoyoju, for his vision to establish DataPro. Kudos to the board of directors and the management and staff for their excellent work. This year's webinar is coming at a very opportune time. Just a few months back, the rating of the world's largest economy was downgraded by Fitch for several reasons, including what was called erosion of governance, underscoring the importance of sound governance and risk management practices for any country or company. The development of infrastructure in cities and regions across the world is critical to economic growth and social well-being. Consequently, securing the funding needed to support infrastructure development is a major issue for governments and policymakers around the world. The world spends more than $2.5 trillion a year on infrastructure, an amount significantly lower than the $3.7 trillion a year that will be needed through 2035, just to keep pace with projected GDP growth. Successful infrastructure delivery demands close alignment and collaboration between a wide range of participants, each with its own agenda and interest. This means that no single player acting alone can effect real change in infrastructure development. Mobilizing private funding for infrastructure projects is crucial to bridge the infrastructure gap across the globe. Consequently, we need improved transparency in the infrastructure project generation process, higher certainty concerning infrastructure frameworks conditions for project execution, and reduce risk for the operation phase. A long-term infrastructure pipeline and better, broader, and more independent cost-benefit analysis are the major levers to pull to accomplish this goal. Accordingly, experts have recommended the following. 1, alignment of infrastructure funding and capital market development through long-term bond market development, superannuation, and pension fund preferences. And 2, enhancing investment attractiveness through higher asset utilization. For this, price signals should guide supply and demand for infrastructure. Full cost recovery should improve the attractiveness of private investment, and new technologies can enhance asset utilization. The economic benefits associated with infrastructure investment can be powerful and sustainable. Increased infrastructure investment can bring a wide range of long-lasting and mutually reinforcing benefits. In the short term, spending on infrastructure projects creates jobs and increases real GDP growth, while ongoing maintenance and repair activities that are necessary to support infrastructure systems can create permanent and well-paying jobs for the middle class. It should be noted that infrastructure investment can provide social and economic advantages only when capital and operating costs can be financed sustainably, either by the revenues the project generates or by government sponsorship. Too many projects become an economic burden and drain on finances when a government borrows money for an undertaking that neither its revenues nor its indirect and direct economic benefits adequately cover the cost. McKinsey Global Institute estimates that infrastructure has a socio-economic rate of return of around 20%. In other words, for every ₦1 of infrastructure investment, GDP can be raised by 20 kobo in the long run. In Nigeria and many other countries across the world, government financial conditions continue to deteriorate while infrastructure needs continue to accelerate, hence widening the infrastructural gap and the need for private investment in infrastructure. The focus shouldn't be financing for plugging the gap, whether it should be on how the financing will be repaid. Among other inputs, private investors rely on the work of credit rating agencies in making investment decisions. And I want to re-emphasize that private investors rely on the critical work that is done by credit rating agencies in making investment decisions. Credit rating agencies play a key role in the financial markets by helping to reduce information asymmetry between lenders and investors on one hand and issuers on the other hand. The issuers know the company, they know the instruments much more than the investors usually know. So you have credit rating agencies there to help in bridging that chasm of information asymmetry. Credit rating agencies have a major impact on today's financial markets, with rating actions being closely followed and impacting on investors, borrowers, issuers, and governments. For example, sovereign ratings play a crucial role for the rated country, since downgrading has the immediate effect of making a country's borrowing more expensive. Issuers with lower credit ratings pay higher interest rates, embodying larger risk premium than higher rated issuers. Moreover, ratings determine the eligibility of debt and other financial instruments for the portfolios of certain institutional investors due to national regulations and strict investment in speculative grade bonds. In rounding up, the job of credit rating agencies is a necessary but difficult one. They are damned if they do and damned if they don't. During financial crisis, credit rating agencies are usually criticized for being asleep at the wheel. And during good times, they're criticized for prompting crisis. Just very recently, a few months ago, Moody's downgraded the credit rating of Silicon Valley Bank the week before it collapsed. And that was attributed as one of the triggers that eventually led to the collapse of that bank. Although the credit rating agencies were only doing their job by exposing the perilous state of the bank. The clamor for the reform of the issuer pays model of credit rating agencies may have pulled off for now, and credit rating agencies will do well not to attract any negative attention to themselves, as any major slip-up by credit rating agencies will reignite the call for the reform of this model. Personally, I cannot think of an alternative model to this issuer pays model. And I believe that credit rating agencies have built adequate controls to address the inherent conflict in this model. Let me end by wishing everyone an engaging and productive webinar. And thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ogundumi, for this wonderful address. You have indeed shown that you have plied your trade very strongly in this market, financial markets, both money and capital markets. So we thank you very sincerely for delivering this wonderful speech, and even for your kind words and encomiums on DataPro team and the smooth delivery of this apt and wonderful keynote address. Your address instructively x-rays the amount expended on infrastructure as being inadequate, and that if the world is to keep pace with the funds needed through 2035 to meet the expected GDP growth rates, that credit rating agencies no doubt stand at a crossroads, irrespective of their opinion or criticisms that they attract. Their job is so important that the society requires their services to strengthen the economy and improve people's lives. A thought-provoking statement you raised hinges on the question, the issuer pays model. Are there alternative models? This will remain on the front burner for the credit rating agencies, observing necessary ethics and professionalism in the discharge of their services. Once again, I want to thank you so much for being part of this, and also to plead with you to continue to partner with DataPro team and indeed the stakeholders, knowing very well what you represent in this market. Thank you, Mr. Ogundumi.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so we move on now with the rest of the program. At this juncture, I would be bringing in the panelists, and to spearhead this and moderate it is one man who has cut his teeth and plied the trade around multiple sectors, who has been in and around for over 25 years and counting, delivering superlative services to most corporates within the capital market and by extension, the money market as well. The topic they are going to be handling for this panel discussion is subnational finance for infrastructure, issues for consideration. There is a panel of 5 with the moderator, no other person than Mr. Oladele Adeoye, the Chief Operating Officer, DataPro Limited. He will be moderating this, and I want to assure you, you are in good hands, because this program has assembled the cream la cream within the market. Prince Adeoye, please.
All right, Doctor, I want to thank you specifically for that introduction. And I also want to welcome our listeners from all over the world, wherever you are listening to us at this point in time, as we take on the issue of subnational finance for infrastructure and issues for consideration. Just like Dr. have rightly pointed out, we paraded important guests who have played a very crucial role in fund provision, in advisory, and so on. And the first on the pack at this point in time is officer, private sector, African Development Bank, with over 15 years experience in development finance and financial advisory, gained in both developed markets and Africa at large. Please join me to welcome to the panel Mr. Peter Onyago. Mr. Peter Onyago, you are welcome.
Thank you very much.
All right. With us this afternoon is also Managing Director of African Plus Partners, Nigeria Limited, and African Infrastructure Funds Chief Investment Officer, with over 25 years of cognate professional experience. Also, welcome Mr. Adeniro Ajakaye. Mr. Adeniro Ajakaye, you are welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Adeoye. It's nice to be here. Thank you, guys.
All right. Thank you. You're welcome. I also want to welcome to the panel the founder and the chairman of Skymark Partners Limited, director and co-owner, UCML Capital Limited, with 21 years old investment banking, asset management, and security trading. Mr. Ege Apata, you are welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Adeoye, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Thank you very much. Before we delve into the question, I want to have your thoughts briefly, maybe in 1-2 minutes, starting from Mr. Peter Onyago. What are your thoughts concerning the theme of our discussion this afternoon, the subnational finance for infrastructure, issues for consideration? Can you just share your thought briefly? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon once again to everyone. On this particular topic, I think one issue which springs to mind is the issue of finding suitable financing. So in most cases, you find for subnationals, but also for national and private sector infrastructure financing, that the terms of the financing that is available is not aligned to the tenor of the underlying infrastructure. So ensuring sustainability in terms of financing of infrastructure projects generally would demand that the financing itself is of similar tenor. So in most cases, it's desirable, though it's not available most of the times, that the cash flows of the project or the tenor of the financing is such that the cash flows of the infrastructure project itself can be sufficient to cover that. So I think it's one area where having capital markets play a role, where you have long-term financing that's available in the capital markets, and being able to tap that long-term financing, which is also best suited for long-term infrastructure, would be ideal for financing for infrastructure in the continent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pete. And I think Mr. Adeni or is your turn. We have your thoughts as well.
Thank you very much. Critically, this topic for this discussion is a very, very important topic for Nigeria as a whole, especially the subnational, where most majority of the Nigerian citizens live, which is the state and local government. At the federal, yes, where there's a thought that the funding at that level is sufficient to cover most of the projects that they want to do. But at the local subnational level, that's where the impact is felt mostly by the citizenry. If you look at all what leads to the issues that we face at the subnational level for lack of infrastructure development, you would start to talk about what are the constraints that the state and local government face in trying to develop infrastructure challenges. Most of these states are not even viable. If you look at the 36 states that we have in Nigeria today, maybe you count about 6 of them that probably we'll call viable states, where you can essentially invest and expect the returns. And the key critical factor that leads to viability is one of them is population. So the states with larger population or with larger access to resources or are these states that are essentially attracting this decent infrastructure development. Some of the challenges that we face, again, is also political interference. Government will create policies that are inimical to growth and investment of private sector or capitalizing or aggregating private sector funding to the subnationals. All these are some of the things that we'll be talking about today. And what are the private sector guys looking out for if they want to invest in all these subnationals? What are the risk factors that we consider? What are the structures and what kind of types of infrastructure strategy or project financing structure that you can put in place to ensure these projects are viable? Some of the things that we think we talk about, and how do we now get rating agency to help make or de-risk to a certain level some of these perceived inefficiencies or perceived riskiness of those projects. And that's where the rating agency like DataPro comes into the picture, where carefully evaluating or rating some of these states will lead to transparency and ease of assessing viability of states by the players in this industry. So some of these things are the critical factors, and we're going to talk about them more as we go on in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. I know in the course of your talking, you actually touch on risk and those things that need to be avoided. in considering some of these projects and some of this infrastructure. And I can assure you that most of the discussions that we are going to raise on this panel, we actually touch based on that. Okay, I guess Mr. Ege Apata is back, and I will allow him share his thoughts as well. Then I can come back to you, Mr. Adeniran, for a question I consider very important before I ask others. So, Mr. Ege, can we have your thoughts? You are back.
Yeah, good afternoon. So, yes, I think it's obviously a well-known challenge. Most state governments in Nigeria clearly don't have the funds to do a number of infrastructure projects they need to get done. However, we need to bear in mind that when it comes to finance, the financial capacity of the states, very few state governments in Nigeria are classified as investment grade. We're surprised if there are up to 5 of them. And that is somewhat a reflection of their financial health. And it does have an impact on the desirability of many of these locations to have private capital go in there. Again, with most infrastructure projects, the projects are attached to the ground. Once your money is there, you really can't take it out. And so you need a very welcoming environment when it comes to rule of law, because obviously if you have legal disputes with the state government, you can't just take your infrastructure and run away. Purchasing power in most states in Nigeria is very low. And the reality is that the actual market of paying customers who can get a lot of infrastructure repaid is probably not existent in most states. Outside a few key Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, 1 or 2 other states, you probably can't really finance anything on a non-recourse basis. So the state governments have to be heavily involved in providing some form of credit enhancement to take on some guarantees or liabilities themselves. I think what probably needs to happen, because this has been something that's been talked about for a long time, is smaller projects that can be showcased. And if you're a state government that wants private money in, start small, show some projects that private money has funded and is getting their money back, and maybe you can do bigger things. It's very unlikely you go from 0 to doing a gigantic project overnight. And I think that's the mistake some states make. I'll stop for now, since we'll go into more details in the question and answer session. Thank you.
I was just going to say that we know that there are issues around subnational generally, but before we delve into what the issues are, we want to actually look at, are there financing options available to subnational? What financing options do they actually have? And I will be throwing that question to Mr. Adeniran Ajapaye to help us look at the various financing options that are available to subnationals. Can you help us to deal with that?
I will. I'll try my best. Thank you, Mr. Adeniran. Essentially, what we all know and what the understanding of most subnational, I'm talking about local and state government, is the very easy, direct approach is to go to the bank. How do I get money? So that's the first option. Most national, they go borrow from financial institution or raise a bond or access any funding from a financial institution. That's number one. The second option that is also available is through PPP. Now we are beginning to see direction or movement in this area because obviously there's no funding even through the banks. If you're not viable as a state, touch you. So, and as such, banks, states, and subnationals are beginning to embrace the PPP arrangement, whereby they partner with the public sector and private sector to provide those services, sign a fair agreement, and do a transparent transaction that is viable. The third one they can do, that local subnational can do, is to leverage on grants. Most subnationals, they are just restricted to their knowledge of, okay, I don't know where to, and there are various international organizations out there that are willing to offer grants, even facility that will for example, provide lighting in your local government and all that. These are grants that are provided by international organizations that can also help fund infrastructure in those critical infrastructure projects in those subnationals. Another one is to embrace innovative financing. Innovative financing, essentially like creating an infrastructure fund or creating a special purpose vehicle to enhance, especially if the transaction is viable. You can do all that to enhance that. And finally, another way is to enhance your revenue collection. That is primarily what most state government, if they do it properly, block all the loopholes or they collect all the tax revenue that they should be collecting. Definitely this will lead to increased revenue base, and as such they can deploy all this. These 5 essentially are the things I think off of the top of my head are areas where subnationals could leverage to increase revenue for building infrastructure. And all any of these 5 options are, but I believe the one that is easy, low-hanging fruit that can be done is what most subnational think of is going to the banks or borrowing or raising a fund. And that avenue is fast closing up now. So you must have other creative ways to do infrastructure financing. And I said, establishing PPP or leveraging grants or innovative solutions are things that we should be thinking of right now, not just the conventional one that we're used to. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I know you've mentioned bank finance. You've mentioned grant from international agency. You have also highlighted PPP, creative funding, the things that you have mentioned. And I'm happy we have African Development Bank with us this afternoon. So I will be asking you, Mr. Peter Onyago, what are the specific you can highlight for us as the contribution of AFDB in closing infrastructure gap in Africa? Would you want to respond to that? Thank you.
Well, yes, thank you. So the way we look at infrastructure is more from an ecosystem perspective. So when you look at the life cycle of the infrastructure, you find that there are various aspects or issues that come up that have been mentioned by the fellow panelists as well. One of them is having an enabling environment or having a policy framework that is supportive and that is predictive. And what the bank does is to partner with the national and subnational governments and other stakeholders, including the private sector, to help in putting together or creating that enabling environment for infrastructure development in member countries. Of course, the more direct intervention area of the bank is investing in infrastructure, and this does happen through the governments, which are the member countries of the bank, but also the subnationals, as well as with the private sector. And it does so through a number of instruments. Some of them have been mentioned: equity investments, loans, guarantees, and in some cases, technical assistance. And on the technical assistance aspect of it, it speaks to one of the issues that has been mentioned here, which is project preparation. So where there's a project that needs to be prepared, developed, and brought to a level of bankability, then you find that the grants or the technical assistance come in quite well. But the bank is also very much active in mobilizing resources from various partners towards infrastructure in the continent. It has a very strong and well-established syndication team. It deploys its convening power to mobilize co-financing from development partners and from other stakeholders for infrastructure financing in the continent. There's also one aspect which is very much related to the topic of today, which is financial markets development. As was mentioned earlier, banks are a good source of financing for infrastructure, but you find that in some cases, banks do not have the suitable long-term funding that is needed for some of the infrastructure projects. And so this is where capital markets comes in. In the capital markets, you have an interplay of various stakeholders, but you have the institutional investors that generally hold long-term funding. And so building capital markets or helping or working with partners to deepen the capital markets in the continent is one area where the bank is increasingly playing a leading role. And with this, I was happy to see also the Securities and Exchange Commission, DG Lamido. We work very closely with them in Nigeria in helping to deepen the capital markets in Nigeria, and also to introduce and mainstream various financing instruments, for example, infrastructure bonds in the market, which then help also in bringing additional financing for infrastructure. But that said, adoption of PPPs, which has been mentioned, is quite critical, and it's an area where the bank is also playing a leading role and would be quite relevant also for subnationals as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Peter. And I can hear from your submission areas of intervention, such as helping to bring up bankable projects, helping to develop the financial markets and infrastructure bonds. And that will be making me to be asking Mr. Ege Apata right now. You have played very well in the bond markets. What would you consider as better option between the PPP and bond issuance, Mr. Ege Apata?
Yeah, thank you. I think in practical reality, Nigeria has 36 states. In practical reality, you're not going to get any non-recourse finance to finance any infrastructure project in at least 30 of those states. That's just the reality. The local economies, by virtue of the per capita income and the size of those economies, probably will not carry the weight of those projects. On the short term, the best option for a lot of those states is to borrow the money on their own books and execute those projects. And so that's what we've seen. What we've seen in the local market is bond issuances by state governments to fund different projects. Now, whether those projects are what they should be funding with their borrowed funds is a different story. But the reality is that there are very few projects in these states that can pay themselves back. As I said, maybe markets, there might be a few markets you can do, maybe one or two car parks, but say you're building a road for 50 billion naira in a state and you expect people to pay tolls that will recoup that money, that's not likely in most of Nigeria. So really, the bond market has been how most state governments have been funding their infrastructure. And that market has had ups and downs, but it's probably one of the longer serving markets. I think Lekki Scheme 1 was financed with the bond in the 90s, and even Lagos Island did a bond in the 90s. So this financing method has been in place for a while. But I think it's unlikely on the short term that you're going to see investors put very large amounts of money in the ground in most states. Maybe in Lagos, you could do that, but the example of the Lekki Concession Company is not necessarily a positive example, where you had a concession that was eventually taken over by the state government, whether profitably for the investors or not. But you don't really have many shining examples of state governments getting funded with private money for long-term projects. And until that happens, you wouldn't really see many people queuing up to do such projects. For now, the bond market is their best option, long-term money. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. And I'm listening to you very well, and I am sure Mr. Adeni Rajakaye was also listening while you were talking. I hope I'm right.
Absolutely.
All right.
Definitely, because
Okay.
sorry, okay.
And that's why I'll be coming back to you right now to ask you, what will be your own consideration when you want to participate in any projects? You can also take it in light of what Mr. Apata said in the course of his submission. So what considerations? Thank you.
Thank you. As he rightly noted and explained, viability is key here. So if states cannot, if projects are not viable, the viability gap are only always, in most cases, funded by the state through the state resources. And that's why most people will say, well, that's why we pay tax. Let them build resources or assets or infrastructure that will serve the needs of the people for paying tax. But the tax is not enough to go around to develop the whole of the state. And as such, you have to find other means and other revenue sources. So when we do PPP or other transactions, there are things that we look out for when we do an assessment of those projects. One of them is the feasibility and financial viability. If a transaction is located in a non-viable location, no financial institution will want to touch it. You assess that viability by looking at the project profitability, you assess the risk factor. We also do identify the mitigants if possible. After doing all this assessment, that's the first stage. After doing this, then you now decide, okay, do I want to go on or not go on? The next thing you also look out for is, okay, you tick the first hurdle. You pass the first box. Yes, it's financially viable. You go to the next one. Does it have clear legal and regulatory framework? Because that is very important. When you're starting a transaction, you look at, okay, if there is any legal recourse, where do I go? How am I protected? What's the protection? Does the law say? How is dispute going to be resolved? Is it in Nigeria? Is it in a court internationally? Especially if you are also using international funds to fund that particular project. After that is checked, after that box is checked, the next one you look at is political and economic stability in that subnational. Especially most of these transactions, if it happens in a state where, the state started with a governor from another party, it moved to a different governor in another party, you have to evaluate that and be sure that there is continuity and you're protected all the way. And that's why I said earlier about the legal framework. Is there a sanction or is there a bill at the state assembly? Is there a bill signed at the state assembly and signed all the way that it becomes the law, even if it's terminated by subsequent government? Are there other protections that you put in place? So you have to also study to understand the political stability of that subnational. And you also look at the economic situation and the security situation in that environment. That's still under political stability. Is it a security risk area? Can I go and do anything in that region? You have to also evaluate that. After that, you now align this project to the core business interest and ability and your expertise in both the stakeholders area. What do I mean by that? So what is this location known for? So this area is known for farming. You will know that over the years, this transaction will continue to grow and expand in that neighborhood. So while you're evaluating, you are ensuring that what you're doing in that neighborhood will not overnight be just a phase in time that will fade off and it's not sustainable over time. And finally, you look at availability and adequacy of resource for the project. So we now look at, okay, how am I going to fund this project? Where's the source of funding coming from? Am I getting it through the PFAs? Because am I getting it through some private patient capital? Am I getting it from, am I raising an infrastructure fund to fund this particular project? I'll now look at the repayment schedule of how am I going to get paid out, where I'm way out of this transaction. Then I'll look at the protection I have if I go into this transaction. What do I mean by protection? Is there a guarantee? People always say sovereign guarantee, but there are other structures you can use outside of sovereign guarantees now that we do currently, where you don't even need the sovereign to give you a guarantee. And there's other instruments that can be protected or provided through a bank that the state will kind of put its weight or its account behind that as a bank guarantee or statement, and you ensure that that project is financed. So, and you also consider the interest rate that you're going to charge, and you consider the demand at the end of the day of the product you're creating. Is there enough demand? Is the population in that
I am sorry, I'm going to kind of have to cut you right there.
No problem.
Because
I know if you leave me, I can talk forever. So sorry.
I know, so I have to quickly come in because we really want, and let me assure you, there are quite representatives across states in Nigeria listening to us right now as part of our audience, and I can see a couple of them. I've cited one from Benue. I have a representative from yes, Lafayette, that's from Ministry of Finance and Budget right there. And so it is in the light of that, I want to ask Mr. Peter Onyago to speak to the facts of those things that you will consider as priority, you know, for a subnational huge infrastructure deficit. What do you think they should place a premium on in terms of addressing the infrastructure gap? I know Mr. Adeniro Ajakaya has spoken to legal issues and so much around having a safe and secure environment to be able to attract people like him to such places. But what other things do you think in terms of the project itself, which of them do you think a state should give priority to? Mr. Peter.
Well, thank you very much. Yes. I would agree with Mr. Adinaran that the criteria that he put forward for bankability is very comprehensive. And I think that is it would be the starting point, say, for every subnational that is looking to develop infrastructure. So you look at most or all of those issues and see whether the pipeline that you have of infrastructure projects that you want to bring to market meet that criteria, because that's very important in attracting funding from various sources and stakeholders out there. And then just to mention maybe that, you know, all forms of infrastructure are quite important. And I think it was acknowledged in the key remarks, the contribution of infrastructure to economic development, and why having well-balanced, being well-balanced in developing the infrastructure of a nation or a sub-nation is quite important. Of course, we have essential infrastructure that kind of critical role in the economic welfare and quality of life of the population, and these ones are generally, let me say, generally funded from national state resources. So you have healthcare, you have education, you have housing, and then you have roads and power. So the contribution of this kind of essential infrastructure in unlocking the productivity and the potential, economic potential of a nation or a sub-nation is quite important. But the process of planning, of course, is always dynamic. It depends, like Mr. Dinaran mentioned, on the resources that are available. It involves taking into account what are the priorities at any given time, and then what can be achieved in reality for the particular subnational. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peter. Okay, let me go to Mr. Ege at this point in time. Do you believe that there are bankable projects, particularly around priorities that Mr. Peter has mentioned? Okay, do you believe that there are bankable projects? And I'm saying that in light of the common belief, you know, in some quarter, I don't want to drag you into discussion around subsidy to be or not to be, but you know, the common belief in certain quarters is that whatever is provided by government in terms of infrastructure is supposed to be free for all. So in view of the need to close this gap and close it quickly, and funding option required and repayment has to be made on some of the funding obtained for those projects. What will be your thoughts in terms of bankable projects around the examples we have highlighted this afternoon? Mr. Ege.
Yeah, thank you. Again, the definition of infrastructure is quite wide. I wouldn't expect any kind of social infrastructure at state level to be bankable, be it schools or hospitals, things like that. Clearly, the state government is going to have to carry the cost. You're not going to recoup any hospital capex from charging fees at the state level. But again, there are some projects that might work. There are some cases where there might be relatively short roads that could work. Of course, things, as I said, things like markets, car parks, yes, maybe truck parks, but roads and bridges, very unlikely, So the reality is that there has to be a clear way for the state government to subsidize a number of these things. There are not many places that have transport infrastructure that is self-funded, even in the Western world. Things like train systems are almost never self-funded, they're almost always subsidized. So there are a few projects, but there are not many. We don't have clear examples of them that are publicly known. I may give the example of Lekki Concession Company, which should have been the shining example. Unfortunately, that ended up effectively being terminated. You have the ports, but again, that's really federal. And those are very, very valuable. But at the state level, there are not very many of them. But there are probably a few that can work. And what we'll need to see is those examples get done and publicized as case studies. One challenge at the state level is that, bear in mind, a state governor can only be in power for 8 years. Most infrastructure projects need more than 8 years. And if you have a situation where you get into dispute at the state level, nobody wants to be stuck in litigation all the way to Supreme Court. It'll take you 20 years to get resolution. And even if you win the case, what's the value of your money at that stage? So very few people want to get into any kind of dispute with the state government, which is why, again, when we look at the way most state government bonds are done, they almost always come with a federal government guarantee or a federal ISPO. I won't call it a guarantee, federal ISPO, which means that at the end of the day, even if the state does not want to pay you your money back, you will get your money back. There have been a few rare cases where things are done at the state level with bank guarantees, but more often than not, they have problems. So the answer is very few. It can happen, but in only a few key areas. Social infrastructure, definitely not. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Even though there are very few, and I'll try to check with our audience to see if there are questions from them. I guess our discussion here is a fair representation of what they have on their minds. So not much question is being posted in. And in view of the time constraint, I will just be doing one question for each panelist at this point in time, permitting, because of time constraint. But Mr. Deniro, I know that in the course of the keynote address, the keynote speaker harped on the responsibility of credit rating agency and infrastructure close. But let me ask you, as operator in that space, what specifically are you expecting will be the role of a rating agency in project financing? Mr. Jakai.
Thank you very much again for this question. Rating agency, as we rightly said, and I made mention of it when I was doing my own intro, can play a good and very viable role in assessing the states that are bankable, essentially, because when people have a credit history, you can follow through what they've done in the past, and you can see how they've progressed over time by assessing their behaviors. So we have some states that are probably me, I will probably not do any business with them because their historical transaction I've done with them has shown that they will not pay or they will find a way to get out of the transaction or litigation without mentioning names. But credit rating agency essentially can do all these roles, can do all these by rating these subnational agencies when they want to access funding from the capital market. If they're raising bond, they rate them. And if they know they will come back for rating, their behaviors towards repayment of credit or paying or servicing those bonds are different. So that's one. They also can improve the fiscal management governance capacity for those infrastructure projects at the subnational level. If an infrastructure project is made and that infrastructure asset itself is rated, and each year in, year out, the rating agencies come back and evaluate or re-rate that subnational asset, you can see the trend at which they've managed that asset, and it can be a pointer to other projects that can be considered by that subnational in future. Finally, rating agency also can serve as a benchmark of performance and progress in infrastructure financing. So if you look at 3 states or 4 states, 36 states, you can rate them and rank them as, oh, this one is doing better than this one, and as such, this will do better. So they will strive. But right now, most, except for the very few that goes to the capital market to raise bonds, most of them don't do that. But I believe that if you go that level and use the rating agencies at these 3-dimension areas, I think it will lead to improvement in the way subnationals even view their management skills, their management ability to service those loans, to make sure those projects are run efficiently, and also their behavioral pattern compared to other states, so we can all benchmark and see how are they performing. So next time I want to raise a bond, I'll just go and check what's their rating. Do they have a good rating? And as such, if they do, I'll say, oh, fine, these guys, they will behave well. I can give them money or something. So those are the things I think we should all embrace and to be a welcome development in this market. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Adeniran. Before I let you go, there's a question in the chat box. I think that question is directed at you, but I will be bringing back the question to you after Mr. Peter has addressed this. And Mr. Peter, for sake of our time, I'm going to lump 2 questions together for you. One, what is the constraint in assessing funds that you have noticed in subnationals, and what are the prerequisites for attracting funding? Those 2 I'd like you to take together because general. Can you take that?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, no, actually, the prerequisites are actually, if you address the constraints, you're almost meeting the prerequisites for attracting funding. And I think that the panel has listed some of the issues. I think one point that I would like to mention is around track record. I would say that it is a journey, and it's important that the subnationals move forward one step at a time and be able to build a track record. So that would then give the potential funding providers confidence. So this track record comes, for example, by starting with quick wins in terms of within the pipeline, and then over time moving to the more complex transactions. And it's a little bit related also to what my fellow panelists mentioned around credit ratings. If you take the approach of a journey, and most of the institutions or nations that get rated, you'll find that it's a process that takes quite a bit of time, because the rating process itself has got a number of key areas that are being assessed, and these key areas are developed within time. So if they can, for example, start to partner with rating agencies just to understand what is it that they would need to put in place over time, to be able themselves, one, to obtain a credit rating, and two, to enhance that credit rating, because then it helps. And it can play also whether that rating is at the subnational level or it will be at project level. I think earlier in the discussions, there was a mention around various structures that are available for financing subnational. So if they're putting together an infrastructure fund, if they're creating a special purpose vehicle, or any other innovative mechanism through which they want to finance the infrastructure, then you still need, where possible, to have a rating for that, to contribute that independent view on the an assessment of that vehicle or structure would be quite helpful. So the second point is around de-risking. This is one area which is developing, and we see a lot of involvement by various stakeholders. The issue of credit quality has come up in the discussions, and one way to transfer that risk or to mitigate that risk is through structuring within de-risking instruments. And this could be in the forms of guarantees, it could be in the form of risk-sharing solutions. So this is something that maybe can become a consideration when looking at infrastructure projects. And of course, bankability has been mentioned quite a bit and remains a key criteria in attracting external resources. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Adeniran. The question from our audience is, what law or framework can be passed to ensure fiscal responsibility of state governments? I guess this person must have picked the question from what you said earlier in your last commentary. So the person, I guess, wants to know, so what kind of law or framework are you expecting from this subnational to enhance subnational fiscal responsibility? Do you have specific one you want to mention to the audience?
So essentially, the way this law work is even when at the bank level, if you're trying to give a loan to the bank, you say they should take it to their state assembly and pass it so that it becomes a law of the land. So things like that are just part of the legal framework that you consider or you evaluate while you're trying to appraise a project. Now, if you say in terms of creating a framework or a policy that can be replicated at the state level, it's going to be project specific or infrastructure type specific. Recently, we know HDMI was an initiative created by Federal Ministry of Works and Housing to privatize some federal roads, especially the viable ones. I'm saying those are the kind of framework you create to identify, to create the concession arrangement, to create the process and procedures and the terms and conditions to which they will run those things, and you pass it as a law. You take it to the National Assembly or the federal, and you pass it as a law, so that there's legal binding for both the two parties, because it's a partnership, right? The state, the subnational, and the private sector guys. So if they clearly understand the framework at which they are contracting, then there's restriction for you to want to default, and there's penalties if you do default. So laws like that are encouraged in various sectors. Another thing is when they pass the law to encourage for states to now start generating their own power at the state level. These are other framework that encourages private sector guys to go into the subnational. If you don't remove the barriers to entry for PPP transactions to be done, definitely it will not happen. Those are the laws will be designed to address the specific need of the kind of PPP that you're trying to build or create. But just as a whole, there must be a very clear regulatory environment that will address the need of the investing party and also of the subnational. It will be very clear, crystal, of what the responsibilities of both parties are and the penalties for default. When there's no penalty for default, that's when state will take laws into their hand and say, I'm state, I will not pay you and I will go away. Those are the things that we've noticed over time. And those are the kind of things we think we can help midwife if those need arises in future.
All right, thank you. And for the sake of our time, I think I'm just going to ask Mr. Ige Apata to address why we have very few privately sponsored infrastructure projects, and also give his closing thoughts on the discussion so far. And I think that will be the last question in this segment of the panel discussion. Mr. Ige.
Well, I think a lot depends on, again, what you define as infrastructure. I think the power industry was privatized in Nigeria. So you have power plants across Nigeria that are privately owned. So somebody might say that you do have private infrastructure there. But if you're talking about, road, bridges and rail and things like that, clearly that is not, we don't have too many examples of that. I mentioned the ports before. Again, very lucrative kind of business to be in, port business. So one of the reasons why you probably don't have a lot of them is, again, you've had examples of issues. Lagos Ibadan was concession one time. Airports, look at the airports situation. Before the last government left, they said they had concession on the airports. New government comes, cancelled it. It's like the second or third time those very same airports were concessioned and going back and forth. So that's not a very good example for the investors to work with. But I think that over time, there has to be, issues they are really not financial or legal. We already have all the frameworks in place and all the laws in place to do these things. I think they're largely political. You have to get to a point where, politically speaking, the parties or the governments in power make a political decision to make some of these transactions work. And more importantly, the voters decide that that's the direction they want to go in. But bear in mind that any kind of project that is privately owned will almost certainly cost more than the government version, which you had mentioned, people see as free. So there are not many examples that we can point to outside, as I said, power, ports. But I think that given the financial situation of Nigeria, given the kind of deficits governments are running, they don't have very many options but to go to the private sector for funding over time. The question is whether the local private sector has that amount of resources locally, or whether you need international funds to make these projects work. Thank you.
All right, and it's on. We are to draw the curtain on this segment of the panel discussion. And for that, I want to thank Mr. Peter Onyago from African Development Bank. I also want to thank Mr. Deniran Ajakaye, Mr. Ige Apata, for your wealth of experience, which you have shared with us this afternoon. Like I mentioned earlier, there are several representatives of subnationals across Nigeria listening to us, and I want to believe that they've been able to learn one or two things from our discussion this afternoon. So on that note, I want to thank you specifically for your contributions. And on this note, I want to go back to our anchor, Dr. Wens Nwoga. Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Prince Oladele Adioye, the Chief Operating Officer, CCO, DataPro Limited. You have indeed shown the stuff you are made of, having crisscrossed various industries and rubbed minds with industry experts, professionals across the world, particularly in Africa. So I want to really thank the panelists for the wonderful way they have deliberated, particularly the discussions they have had around this very important aspect of our webinar, infrastructure development. How do the subnationals leverage and, of course, use these areas to be able to propel development within the states? We know the role they play because states occupy a very wonderful position to be able to jumpstart development and pull people out of poverty. It is very, very important that they understand how to be able to leverage these options, and these have been proven that they are workable. So we have really listened to industry experts in the person of Mr. Adeniro Ajakaye, the CEO, MD, Africa Plus Partners. We also listened to Mr. Egi Akpata, Director, UCML Capital. And also we had Peter Oyago, Chief Investment Officer, AFDB, African Development Bank, also his views. And we have the moderator, Prince Oladele Adeoye. We can say we have really soaked a whole lot from you, and the stakeholders will be indeed happy for your coming. So in summary, from Peter Oyago, who spoke on the issue of finding suitable financing, ensuring sustainability, and being able to tap into the long-term financing for infrastructure in the continent, indicating that those are key components. All forms of infrastructure are important for economic development. He went further to also add that even though we have essential infrastructure like roads, housing, and power, which play key roles in the lives of citizens, the process of planning is dynamic as it involves what can be achieved in reality. These are all positions that he put forward. And then Mr. Adeniro Ajakaye also came in with his own perspectives, where he indicated that options available is borrowing from the banks, public-private partnerships, and leveraging on grants. Viability is key. That if projects are not viable, no investor would want to touch it. To assess the projects, they must have clear legal framework, political and economic stability, bank guarantee, and must be considered as priority. Also, we went further to listen to Mr. Ege Akpata, who posited that it is a well-known challenge that the government in Nigeria doesn't have the funds in deploying infrastructure projects. Purchasing power in Nigeria is low, and so state governments need to be involved in taking on liabilities and responsibilities. The bond market has been how most state governments have funded their infrastructure, and it is saturated. That for now, long-term money option is their opportunity they have to leverage. Mr. Ege also went further to say bankable projects are few, but not many at the state government levels. We would like to see these examples. So he stated that bankable projects can happen, but in a few areas. Social infrastructure is not one. And then in conclusion, rating agencies can play key roles in assessing states that are bankable. Credit rating agencies can serve as a benchmark for infrastructure financing and evaluation. And so we want to thank you very well for all these expositions, all these wonderful value propositions you have laid down. And I'm certain that representatives of various states who are here with us today will leverage all your positions. So once again, we thank the panelists for coming. We also want to thank our numerous guests who have also joined us from various parts of the world to be part of this wonderful event, which happens annually from DataPro. We are looking forward to also the next year. So as we are closing, we would also want to be able to do the vote of thanks, and the person to do it is also the Chief Operating Officer, Prince Oladele Adeoye. Please, Prince, go ahead, please.
All right. Thank you, Doctor. And on behalf of the management and staff of DataPro Limited, I want to express my delight to everyone that has contributed in any capacity to the successful hosting of this year edition of DataPro Annual International Rating Webinar. Permit that I single out the encouragement received from our regulator, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and particularly the Director General, Malam Yuguda. We want to thank him for always sending a high-powered delegation to grace the webinar annually. And this year representation by Mr. Abbas Abdulkadir has indeed added bright color to the event. So we also want to appreciate such as African Development DP, Nigeria Mortgage Refinance, NMRC, Post Finance, and UCH Limited for sending tips to grace this occasion. And it is in that regard that I want to specifically express gratitude to our key speaker, Mr. Kenye Dimo of NMRC, for the very insightful keynote address. To our panelists, thank you all that benefited from the work of experience that today. It will be a disease if to recognize the contribution from my team members, those who dedicated themselves for a year to today. And with the outstanding success that we have recorded, I believe that we fully say all the toiling and we put into this event in this year. Let me also again to the chief visionary, the founder of DataPro Limited, Mr. Bimbola Adeshoyoju. And I do hope that with this that we have achieved today, he can then beat his chest that is indeed a very good coach. My appreciation also to our technical crew for ensuring that we run without glitches today. Also to our distinguished allies in the media. Thank you for giving this event the wide publicity that it was able to garner across. And to all our participants across the states in Nigeria, I want to say specifically thank you to Benue State. Thank you to, I think Nasarawa is also represented. Thank you. And then to other states that I could not mention but represented, I want to specifically thank you. So to all our participants, we are indeed very grateful. And I am trusting you that we will catch up again the second Thursday in the month of October 2024. We want to see you there. Thank you very much, and God bless.
Okay, thank you very much, Prince Oladele Adeoye, the CEO DataPro, for that great vote of thanks. We indeed appreciate all our guests that have come in from all over the world. Now we want to move on to the next item, which is closing prayer. And here we have Alhaji Sani Mustafa, the Director of Compliance, Pension Transitional Arrangement Directorate, PTAD, to offer the prayers. Alhaji, please.
Thank you, Doctor. The DataPro team, the guest speaker, the distinguished panelists, the participants, Assalamu alaikum. We pray to Almighty Allah to help us learn from the lesson of this webinar. We also pray for blessings to DataPro for deploying their resources to gather distinguished individuals to increase this, which will benefit our economy. the carrying power of the economy in a developing country, Nigeria, is really very important. It is also, credit rating also enhanced when there is efficient deployment of capital. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Fatiha. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alaji, for that closing prayer. And we indeed have found out that obviously subnationals occupy a very important position and play key roles in nation building and development, amongst which include infrastructural development, including social and physical infrastructure. That infrastructural development is capital intensive, hence the need for consultation, cooperation, coordination, and consolidation amongst stakeholders, which includes governments, regulators, subnationals, credit rating agencies, investors, and all stakeholders. DataPro Limited's 2023 International Rating webinar has provoked a lot of thoughts, financing options, and importance of infrastructural development for mutual benefit of all stakeholders. We do hope you will join us in our numerous engagements. And again, next year, which comes 2024, we also believe you will be here for another great moment when DataPro will host a similar annual program as part of its corporate social responsibility and advocacy. Right now, we'll be taking the national anthem, and we will be closing out with it. Okay, thank you once again for being part of the International Rating Webinar 2023, powered by DataPro. We do hope to meet you again next year, God willing this time, and in all other engagements hosted by DataPro, as we now leave you with some of the DataPro products. Thank you very much, and bye for now.